Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast,
a space dedicated to spreading the message that you have the power within to create everything you seek.
So if you're ready to enroll in a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with us.
We're your hosts, Rudi and Anniston, and this is Empowered Life. Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast. My name is Rudi Riekstins. I'm your host. I'm joined by Anniston Riekstins, our co-host, and I'm really grateful Anniston is able to join us today, bringing a little bit of the curtain back for all of you. Anniston had a minor surgery a few weeks ago, so it took her some time to heal. And then after that, she got a bit of an infection in just, her nasal passages and
I've just been coughing. A mess. I think this is what it comes to. I've been a bit of a mess, but I'm recovering. And I'm here. I'm all for it. I'm excited.
Everybody that's been wondering, where is Anniston and when is she coming back to co-host? Now you know why. And I woke up this morning just really excited because not only do I love to share this space with you and to be able to have these incredible conversations, which we have daily, but to be able to record them so that the world can have a little bit of a window into what is it like to have these conversations just flowing to us and through us each and every single day. So I am very excited to be sharing this time and space with you today.
Well, I'm excited as well. But I will tell you, even when I'm not on the podcast, the conversations that Rudi and the type of conversations Rudi and I have, like the really deep, meaningful stuff, still happens on the daily. And what we want to talk to you about today is actually one of those conversations that's been coming up a lot lately. Oftentimes at the end of the day, we'll check in and that's when Rudi will share, I'm starting to see a lot of clients bring something forward and I'm noticing a pattern. And this is what we want to talk about today, a pattern that he is seeing that's coming up in a lot of people right now. It is not a new thing, but it is something we feel like it's important we bring to the larger audience, because if they're dealing with it, you probably are too.
So before we talk about today's episode, Anniston just, touched on the power of paying attention to the information that is being laid out in front of you, because at all times there is a flow and there is information that is coming to you, and it is not always for you, it's serving, and you need to be paying attention to what is your responsibility in bringing that message forward. And so I have always created the habit of looking for patterns. When I see something, I pay attention. Okay, I've noticed it. When I see a second time, my interest is piqued. Third time, I'm like, well, now we have a pattern. And as Anniston had alluded, I have had a pattern over the last few weeks of clients coming forward and all of them dealing with the same issue. Now, this isn't new to my business, but I have just noticed it with such increased acceleration over the last few weeks that Anniston said, wow, we really need to be able to bring this forward and into the larger arena of the Empowered Life podcast. Just to be clear, when I talk about seeing this coming up in my clients, I never mention who my clients are, what it is, what the specific is as it relates to the people. But we do have the broader conversations of I'm noticing these things, because we also acknowledge that as we are serving somebody and dealing something, we're often dealing with something very similar ourselves, and you're going to learn about that. And that is why I bring this into the relationship with my wife every day, and that is why this relationship is now being brought into the podcast. And so today we're going to be talking to you about imposter syndrome. And I would love for you to kick off, what does imposter syndrome mean, and how can somebody identify that they are dealing with imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome, my definition of, is a state of being where someone is having an inner dialogue of, I'm not enough, I'm not capable, people are going to call me a fake and a fraud, I don't belong here, what I produce isn't good enough, I'm not as good as other people. It's a narrative. And honestly, I think a lot of it is based in a foundation of limiting beliefs that then all manifest in a syndrome. And I think, oftentimes we can start to identify with this voice in our head, which prolongs the syndrome. So that, I think, would be the simplest way to put it.
So I had a client call me, head of a really large organization, thriving business, doing extremely well. And the conversation went along the lines of, what if people think I'm not good enough? What if they lose faith in me because I'm still figuring it out? And that is an imposter syndrome. That is the feeling of like, how do I do this? And maybe I don't know enough to be able to do this. And what if everybody else loses faith or trust in me? Or what if I've lost faith or trust in me? And it's because we are having the feeling inside of us that says we're not qualified to be able to do the thing that we're doing, or we've never done the thing that we're doing. And I believe that it's more the latter. Every single time I've ever experienced imposter syndrome, which has been a tremendous amount of time in my life, that I have walked into a room and felt like, man, I do not fit in this room. And I don't mean like, oh, these are not my people. I mean, I want to be in the room. I just don't feel like I'm adequate to be in the room. And every time that I've done that, it's because I've never been in a room that big. I've never done something that's scary. And so we want to unpack a little bit of that today. But before we get to it, if you're listening to this, I want you to ask yourself, where in your life right now do you feel imposter syndrome? Where does it come up for you? And if you be really honest with yourself and you pay attention to the inner dialogue that you're having, do you feel like you're an imposter at work? Do you feel like you're an imposter sometimes in some friendships, maybe relationships, maybe it's in different ventures or health or well-being, where you feel intimidated and you're worried that you're not worthy to be in the room? It's not always that you have the title and you're worried about losing the title. Sometimes it's about wanting the title, being given a position to have or the opportunity to have the title, and still being like, hell no, I can't do that, because that's also imposter syndrome. But as we go through this episode today, we want you to be able to take the information and action it immediately on this podcast and into your life. And so where do you have that feeling of I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or it's never going to work out for me, or maybe people will think that I'm not good enough or worthy, and uncover how I really feel about myself and bring that to the forefront, because we're going to be giving you solutions in how you can identify it. And then what do you do to be able to move forward and move out of these feelings of imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is a big deal. It's a big deal because I believe it can be incredibly destructive for somebody's life if they allow it to be. Yet it's something that we all deal with. It doesn't discriminate between age, race, gender. I mean, it happens to us all. Yet I don't think we talk about it enough. I don't think we are open enough about it and share stories of how we each have experienced imposter syndrome. And if we did, which I know we can, have more of those conversations, I think there would just be an immense amount of relief that a lot of people would feel. So we're hoping that this conversation is going to give you that relief, but also some tools. I believe that at every level, anytime you're doing something new you've never done before, the first time I was waitressing, and it was like my first shift, and going up to my first table and standing there like, hi, I'm your waitress. Let me take your order. And I remember even thinking to myself like, oh my God, I hope these people don't know this is my first time. I've never waitressed before. I have no idea what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like, what if they find out? I mean, it comes truly at every level. When I became a mother, and the first time we brought our firstborn son, Brady, home, and I felt like I was completely out of my element. I looked at all the other moms and I felt like they just had it all together. They knew what they were doing. And yet, just like everybody else, I think everyone's doing the best they know how to do. But here's a little secret. Nobody's got it all figured out. Nobody. Even the leader that you look at that you think can do no wrong and always has the right answer and always doing the right thing, I guarantee you that leader also suffers from levels of imposter syndrome. But to the degree that you know how to work through it is how you can turn what is a negative into a positive. You can transform those feelings and actually make them work for you. For me, imposter syndrome has never come up as much as it has as when I started really pursuing my purpose, my calling to be a spiritual teacher, a writer, a speaker, and a leader in an organization. Because my heart was like, yes, 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 do this. And I would be getting these intuitive messages of like, do this, try that. And it all felt so scary to me because my mind was in direct conflict with what my heart was telling me to do. My mind was saying, no, this is dangerous. This is not safe. This is going to cause a lot of pain. This is going to cause a lot of humiliation. And so it's in that, I feel like that conflict where the imposter syndrome really can take hold if you allow your mind to override your heart. So I would love, Rudi, for you to give us like the science behind what is really happening. Because I think if we understand that part, then we can really start to unpack and see our way how to navigate through it.
So before we get to the science, which I think is so necessary at a very simplistic level so that everybody can walk away with understanding how is imposter syndrome formed, and then how do you really eradicate imposter syndrome. I want to first give you a little bit of information that's going to normalize this. There was a research study done, and I believe it was 1,000 executives that were in top corporate companies across America. And I think it was like the top Fortune, 500 or 5,000 companies. But they interviewed about 1,000 people. And then from this, it was based on imposter syndrome. They determined that 93% of women suffer from imposter syndrome in leadership roles. And I just mentioned, we're talking about some of the biggest companies in the world. And so we're talking about Fortune 500 or Fortune 5,000 companies. I forget which study it was in and whether it was solopreneurs, but very successful, affluent people. 93% of these women turned around and said that they were suffering from imposter syndrome. Their biggest concern was the same concern that my client had, which was walking into work every day thinking, when are people going to realize I'm a fake and a fraud? Like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And every day I'm having to figure it out. And that's 93% of people, females, that are in corporate America running really big businesses. And what I found most astounding about this research study was it was aimed at women in leadership, and that was the basis of the article. But it also included that 87% of men in corporate America also felt that they suffered from imposter syndrome.
Can I say something on that really quick? While you were talking, it was funny. I was imagining being in a big boardroom and when you're a leader and you're taking over a big position and you see everyone sitting around a table and you're presenting an idea, you're leading, and you're looking at the eyes that are all staring at you. It's the story you're telling yourself of what they're thinking. Because I remember distinctly sitting in a boardroom much like that, and when I was really new in leadership. And the story I was telling myself as I was speaking was, they don't believe me. They don't think this is a good idea. They're all sitting there thinking, why is she at the head of the table? She hasn't earned that right. Somebody else across the way is much more qualified. So I just wanted to kind of give you a picture, because I think that many of you can probably relate to that. And even if you're not at the head of the table, you just have a seat at the table. What is the story that you're telling yourself?
So that beautifully sets up where we wanted to go next, which was the science. I am so vocal about educating people about how we think and how we feel, and how our thoughts and our feelings dictate how we show up in any time and space. So I want to simplify that. If you're sitting in a boardroom and it's your first time sitting at the big table, and you have a tremendous amount of pressure that you've put on yourself because you want to show up and you want to be accepted and you want to prove yourself and you want to get the money, the raise, the title, you want to move forward, you want to be the person that brings the best ideas in. Well, that's a lot of pressure that you put on yourself, and justifiably so. Like, I totally get it. But as you walk into the room, if you all of a sudden start to think, I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy, that single thought that enters into the mind, I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy, is now going to chemically induct the body into altering itself to match the feeling of I am not good enough. I speak into all the time. You have three bodies. You have the mental body, which is where your thoughts are. You think the thought, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, they don't believe me, I don't belong in this room, what if they think I'm a fraud, oh, I'm so nervous, whatever the thought is. That thought then goes into the physical body. Your physical body today in the modern science tells us that a single thought manipulates physical matter. So you think the thought and your body now starts to shift and change. It physically alters itself. Every cell in the human body will vibrate to match the frequency of the thought that you were thinking. So if the thought was, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm a fraud, your body starts to move and shift and alter into the physical state of being a fraud. That might mean your palms get sweaty, you go into stress, fear, fight or flight, your tongue gets thick, your shoulders pull forward. Even further, you take up a little more space, you push yourself away from the table. That's the physical body starting to act and alter itself. But then it also induces the energetic body, which extends up to 15 feet past you. Now you are sitting in a room and you are energetically pushing the energy into the room of I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy. People are now sitting in your energy and feeling that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And that's called incongruence. That's where you're trying to say something and sound smart and sound like you know what you're doing and be confident, but your lack of confidence is actually speaking on your behalf. Now, we know 87% of communication is nonverbal. Majority of that is passed through energetic information. But that's not even the bulk of it. Because now, as you thought the thought, I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy, you've now instructed your brain to look for all evidence in the room, which is 10 million bits of data every single second, to narrow it down to 50 bits of data to reinforce what you were thinking to be true. So if you were looking at an entire spreadsheet of just data, and all the data was there proving whatever it is that you're wanting to prove, but you were looking for a very specific outcome, your brain is going to only focus in on 50 bits out of 10 million to reinforce that you're right. And so if you're sitting in that room and somebody yawns, you're going to only see the yawn and you're going to think, they don't believe me, they're bored. If you think, that person just rolled their eyes, you don't know that they read a text message a minute before and had nothing to do with you. And you're processing all this information to reinforce, they don't believe me, they don't think I'm good enough. And now you're caught in this loop. So not only are you thinking the thought, you're seeing the evidence of it. Not only are you thinking the thought, seeing the evidence of it, you're feeling it. Emotions are processed inside the human body. And so if you feel an emotion in you, it feels like it is you. But emotions are not you. You are not your emotions. And we need to separate ourselves from the emotions. And this is how we get to shift ourselves from how do we get out of imposter syndrome so we can take our power back.
So I remember I'd like to tell a story just to share one of my own personal experiences with this to really ground what you just said. So when Rudi and I first launched our coaching business, both him and I were coaching. He had a coaching roster and I was ready to have one of my own. And I remember getting on my first, enrollment calls, if you will, where I had a whole 2 days scheduled of just calls with different potential clients who were interested in potentially, hiring me as a coach. And I poured into them for an hour each. And I remember thinking, wow, this is going so well. But then when it would come to the time for me to actually speak about my coaching packages and charging for my coaching, my energy would completely shift. I would definitely fall back into this, oh, I hope that they don't think that I'm not qualified. Oh, I hope that they think that I'm worthwhile. Oh, you know what I mean? And lo and behold, they wouldn't sign with me. And I remember after those 2 days, I was just really disempowered and disappointed because I thought, what is wrong? I know I can coach because when I look back to all the times I've done it before, this was just me showing up and questioning whether or not I could charge for it. And I felt like imposter. And what the realization I had then was that if I am not enrolled and believe myself to be a transformative coach, how is anybody else supposed to believe I can be? And that speaks into the energy, right? If my energy is not speaking into, I am confidently being this thing, and I know that I'm qualified to do it just as I am today, then they were experiencing probably a kind of a confusing mismatch of information for me. What I was saying wasn't matching my energy. And so that leads into the question that you asked. What do you do? Well, first of all, the first step is becoming aware. It's becoming aware of, all right, I believe I'm suffering from imposter syndrome because you'll start to notice the symptoms of them. And the symptoms are how you're feeling in your body. It's questioning yourself. It's thinking everybody else knows better than you. It's the thoughts that you think. And then it's the behaviors that happen, because the behaviors will always indicate what you're thinking. If you're not sure, I don't know if I am, I'm not really sure, look at your behavior. Symptoms, common behavioral symptoms of imposter syndrome are perfectionism. Oh, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. And which leads to a lot of inaction because you're just stuck in this cycle of it's got to be perfect. Procrastination, big time. Overworking because you think, well, I don't really believe I'm capable, so I'm going to overwork everybody else. I'm going to outdo everybody else in my number of hours that I'm working. It can also look like not being able to ask for help because you feel like if you ask for help, it's going to lead other people to believe that you are the imposter that you are and that you're not good enough for this position. It could be not being able to receive a compliment. I can't tell you how many people I see when someone says, hey, you're doing a great job. And they're saying, oh, well, no, I mean, and they deflect because they themselves don't believe it. So they can't receive it. And so I think that's the first step, is to really start to observe the symptoms and the behaviors that you have. And then from there, you can start to unpack and start to reframe. And I think Rudi and I are big fans of asking really good questions to yourself, whether that be journaling, in a process in the morning as part of your priming, or even in the minute. So what questions do you think could be good ways for them to reframe and rethink their perception of whether or not they're qualified?
For anybody who's listening to this episode for the very first time and has not been on the Empowered Life podcast, it's important for us to explain that when you ask a better question, so meaning when you go into your mind and you ask a question, you're instructing the brain now to look for new information. So you're breaking the cycle of what you were thinking and feeling, because 95% of your thoughts are unconscious, they're happening on repeat, and you're not in control of them. But when all of a sudden you start to say, what am I feeling right now? Oh, well, I'm not feeling good enough. I'm not feeling worthy. I'm feeling like a failure. I'm feeling like a fraud. I'm feeling like an imposter. I'm feeling like I'm going to get caught out. The moment you're aware of that, you are now stopping the brain from producing the emotions of that. The brain says, great, got it. We're now aware that you are in fact feeling those emotions. And so it's not going to continue to induce you with them unless you continue to think those thoughts. So the very next thought would be to now instruct the brain in a new train of thought. Remember, you're going to look for evidence based on the emotions and the thoughts that you were thinking prior. So if a new thought is, where in my life have I ever felt this way before? And so you go back to a previous time. I'm going to tell you, every single job I have ever had, I have walked in and felt like an imposter. Same as Anniston going to wait a table for the very first time and standing there as a waitress with a little notepad, and she's never done it before and she's hoping she doesn't mess up. I've been there. And I had that same feeling. And then I served the first table and I was like, not so bad. I think I've got this. And then you grow in your confidence and you move forward. The more the stakes, the longer you stay in that position. And every time I've gone into a new job and I took over a new job, I knew very little about the job I was stepping into. And so I had a lot of period, between where I was to where I needed to be proficient in that job. And so throughout the months of learning the job, I was very insecure about my efficiency, not my ability, just my efficiency at that time. And that is interpreted as, I don't know enough yet. Oh, I hope they don't realize that I don't know enough. Maybe I was too confident in my interview and I need to show up. But that was just the learning period. Then I got the next job, and maybe it was in the same company and it was just a promotion. Well, the job changes with the promotion. So the scope changes. So the responsibility changes. And so the feeling of, I don't know enough now. I did there, I was comfortable there, and now I don't know what the next is. And so that then moves you into another feeling of imposter syndrome. And that continues to grow as you move forward. But if you can instruct the brain by asking, man, when have I ever felt this way before? And I can go back and say, oh my gosh, at this event, with this client, in this company, in this job, now I have a number of times where I have felt that emotion. And now I can turn around and say, how did it work out for me? And now I'm looking for evidence, actual physical evidence, data in the brain. Oh, you know what? I actually did really well in that job. It took a little while, but I eventually settled in. And so you're starting to reassure the brain that, hey, this feeling is normal. It just means you're doing something you've never done. You're leaning into something. And now you're starting to look for the evidence of what is it that I need to be able to do. And by instructing your brain for where have I felt this? When did I actually have this feeling and it worked out really well for me? And then we can start to look for what are some of the things that I can do now to give me the confidence to be able to do the thing that I need to be able to do.
I think that you bring up a good point, because a lot of what you're saying is, and what I'm hearing you say is, it's around belief. It's around belief. And it's around, like, oftentimes we'll skip a really, really important step. And if we took the time to do it, it could save us a lot of the suffering and the messy middle area where you're going through imposter syndrome. And that is, when you're going to do something new, or you're taking a new position, or whether it's just a new season of your life, you're getting married for the first time, you're going to be a wife, you're going to be a husband, you're going to be a parent, whatever that is, take the time to build the belief, and to build the belief that you can, that you are able, that you are capable, and that you also are qualified. And sometimes, you might look back and be like, I'm not qualified though, because someone else who had this position, they had these qualifications. I don't have them. But if you look back with the belief and the perspective of, I am always being qualified for what is coming next, that oftentimes, if you look back at your experiences, you have been qualified. It might not look like the person that was you're taking over from. It might not look at all like that, like what their journey was. But it's having faith that you have exactly what you need in order to do what you're doing right now, because otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. It wouldn't be put in front of you. And that belief has really served Rudi and I. But I think taking that time to be a belief builder for yourself, which is doing what Rudi just said, looking back at the times you felt this way before and how it worked out for you, right? How you moved through it. It also passed. And then all of a sudden you were in your confidence, or you were in the flow. What was new was not new anymore. You found efficiencies, and then all of a sudden you were on to the next thing. And if you skip that step, then you find yourself in imposter syndrome. It's not too late to go back and to stop and to ask those questions. So I'm glad that you brought those forward.
Another thing that I think is really important is that you normalize the emotion. And so we mentioned to you earlier that there was that research study, over 1,000 people interviewed. 93% of women feel like they're imposters. 87% of men also feel like they're imposters, which is pretty much every single person on the planet. And so if we understand that, it doesn't feel so intense. Anniston often says, if you're feeling like an imposter in something, go to Barnes & Noble, pick a book off the bookshelf from somebody that is in the field of where you're aspiring to go, and read their story. And she guarantees you're going to find a section, a page, a chapter where they are struggling with imposter syndrome. And if you can read something, and the reference she loves to use is Michelle Obama. And Michelle Obama talks about how she struggles with imposter syndrome. And then you look at everything that she's ever done, everything she's achieved, and the impact she's created in the world. And you're like, how on earth could she suffer from imposter syndrome? And so when you read that and you're like, oh, well, if she is, then it's okay that I feel this way. And so right here, right now, on the Empowered Life podcast, we want to tell you it is okay to feel like an imposter. In fact, I encourage you to put yourself in environments where you feel like an imposter. And here's why. If you feel like an imposter, it means you're doing something that you have never done before. So you're going to achieve something potentially that you've never achieved before. And by putting yourself in environments where you feel like, oh man, I'm not good enough, or it means you need to stretch. It means you need to grow. It means you need to do something. We started today talking about one of my clients coming forward and feeling like an imposter. But I also have another story that also came from the last 2 weeks. And in speaking with the client, because I host these group programs called Elevated Leadership, and it's where I take an entire group of people through an intense leadership program inside of companies where we curate very strategically specific scenes and situations that actually push people into stepping up and leveling up their leadership. Part of this program is touching on imposter syndrome. And one gentleman on a call with me privately said, I never feel like an imposter. And he was very proud of himself for not being the statistic. And so when unpacking where he is, what he's doing, what's going on in his life, and I'm going to give you the exercise. I'd suggest that he draw a big circle on a piece of paper, divide them into these little pies. And in each area, divide, whether it was 12 or 16, all the different areas of his life that were really important to him. And how did he feel in each area? What was he doing in each of those areas? Then I asked him to draw a bigger circle around that and then write out where would he want to go or wants to be. And what that identified was in the circle in the center where he never feels like an imposter, not at work, not in his personal life, not in his sporting, not in his coaching, all the things he had going on outside of him. He felt very comfortable. And he was like, oh yeah, no, I don't suffer from imposter. I'm really good. And he was proud of that. But when we drew the second circle, we realized he was playing too small. He wasn't stretching himself in any area of his life. So he was very complacent. And if you're complacent, you're going to stay the same. So to say, I don't feel like an imposter is another way of saying to a high performance coach, I don't want to grow. And so I want to challenge you. If you don't feel like an imposter, draw those two circles. In the middle, where are you? How do you feel about where you are? And then if you could stretch yourself into being more, doing more, achieving more, what would it take? And that's going to start to identify what are the steps that are going to get you to feeling like, man, I've done something I've never done before.
I love that. And again, it's normalizing the fact that we're always expanding. We should always be expanding and growing. And that and imposter syndrome is just something that is likely to happen. So not only do you need to plan for it, and I think this is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, but plan and prepare and have a plan. Like, what are you going to do when imposter syndrome inevitably, because it is inevitable, shows up for you? And so that you minimize the amount of time that you're affected by it. Because I have definitely seen, we've seen so many people, especially in the coaching field, I would say, just because of the fact that we are in the coaching field, seeing so many people, want to start a coaching practice, for instance, and then they're like, but I don't have any clients. So how am I going to get, clients if I don't have any clients? They're not going to believe I'm a coach, because how can I coach if I'm not a coach? And, it's looking for ways to build that experience. It's looking for ways to coach for free, and to give yourself the opportunity to be a coach, so that you start being that what you want to be, and you build confidence in that. And then the imposter syndrome will be a lot shorter. So again, it's just building out a plan. And it just as you're building out a business plan, you have a marketing plan. I would have a plan for, what am I going to do when these internal obstacles rear their ugly head, so I don't let it stop me, because unfortunately, it stops a lot of people. It stops a lot of people from fulfilling, in my opinion, their greatest mission in life, because they can't discern between what their heart is telling them to do and saying, this is the way and this is what you were born to do, and what their mind is so loudly telling them to stop and to halt, because it's dangerous. And so I think that the most important thing is just to not ignore it. Don't just repress it and let it continue, and talk about it. I would find someone to talk about it with, because I guarantee you, when you do, they're going to turn around to you and say, oh my gosh, me too.
I am 46 years old, and I have been coaching now for a very, very, very long time. And I do this work and I teach this work, and I'm still experiencing this work. And I want people to hear that, because, we have an idea of, well, oh, that person isn't dealing with that insecurity because look at them. We only see a snapshot of somebody, and we don't understand the internal dialogue that anyone is going through at any given time. And we also don't know when somebody is rubbing up against a feeling of, oh, I haven't done this before, or this is new, or I feel insecure. So we don't really have the context for anyone outside of ourselves, and only ourselves, if we're paying attention to what we're really thinking and feeling. I went in to speak at an event, and there were some speakers that were going to be on stage with me at this event that I really, really, really like. And I wanted to walk into the room and be seen by them. I wanted to be respected by them. I wanted to be valued and appreciated by them the same way I respect, value, and appreciate them. But they'd never heard of me before. And I'm walking into a room already knowing who they are, what they've done, read their book, seen them speak. And so for me, it was very exciting to be invited to speak at an event with them. But the insecurity began to creep in about speaking in a room with this level of talent. And so when I was in the room and, engaging with them and going for dinner with them and then speaking on stage alongside them, I didn't realize at the time how much of the insecurities and the overwhelm and the what if they don't think I'm good enough, and then my brain started looking for evidence that they don't, and this person gets up and walks out halfway through your presentation, and that tells you in that moment at that time, oh, they didn't find value. But what was so ridiculous about that was, afterwards I had a friend lovingly call me forward and say, hey man, I noticed in most rooms you're like the biggest person in every room, and you've got this incredibly powerful energy and demeanor. But in that room on that day, you played really, really small. Like, what was going on there? And when I further unpacked the feelings that he experienced of me, I realized, wow, I had allowed the narrative of imposter syndrome. What if they don't think I'm good enough? What if I'm not worthy, to creep in? And so I was so grateful to have a friend that could actually turn around and give that gift to me. And so a shout out to Kelly Siegel. You're a legend, brother, and I love you. And to have that level of friendship to call you forward gave me the gift of being able to go back into my mind and see, where did I start to see that narrative and how did I not pick it up at that time? But it prepared me, because 2 weeks later, I had a series of 3 different interviews that I was going to, and I was flying cross country really big calls, really big meetings, and then really big interviews. And there was the same feelings started to come in because now I was doing something I hadn't done before. And I was going into a room I hadn't been in before. But the moment I felt the same emotions, I stopped. And here's where the work comes in that we've so beautifully given you today. And that is to go back into your mind and say, what am I feeling? Where have I felt this before? Okay, I recognize where I felt that. Well, how did that end? Oh, well, that actually ended really well. Okay, great. Where else have I felt that and how did that end? Okay, well, that ended well. Oh, that was awesome. That I crushed. And you start to stack the evidence of that felt really good. I remember taking that job feeling nervous. And in the end, I did really well and I loved it. And so I started to stack the evidence. But then I went really close to the emotion of what I was feeling at the time. And I then started stacking very specific results of very specific things of what people said to me at the end of an event, at the end of an interview, at the end of something. So I started building that narrative. The beautiful difference between the two was that when I left that particular trip, I walked away with business partnership deals. I walked away with business ventures. I walked away with people wanting to bring me into their organizations and even to speak on additional stages and really big rooms. And all of that transpired in the most, I want to say beautiful, but the easiest way, because I no longer was working at it. I was just in alignment with my thoughts, in alignment with my feelings. My energy was in alignment with what I was saying and feeling, and it was speaking on my behalf. And so there was a level of assuredness, a level of confidence that was coming through me because I wasn't trying to be assured. I wasn't trying to be confident. In that moment, I was just Rudi. And I think that's the most beautiful thing is when we can just step back into, as Anniston had said, if something comes to you, if you've got a job, if you're in a room, if you're anyway doing anything, in that moment, it's meant for you. And if it wasn't, you wouldn't be there. And so you just have to trust that this is for you. You're prepared to be able to do it and then allow you to come through.
This is an inner game we're playing here on Earth. Really, truly. Whatever change you make within is going to be reflected to you externally. So if you don't like what you're seeing, if you don't feel like people are looking at you with respect, if you don't feel like you're being given the opportunities that you want, the work starts within. The work starts with how you shift, how you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself, what you feel like you're worthy of, what you believe yourself to be capable of. And when you do this work, which is the most profound, life-transforming work you will ever do, the reward is in what you get to experience out in your life, in the moments, in the minutes and hours and days and years. And this is why we're so like just in love with this podcast, because of all the things that we get to share with you guys, because we feel like we know a secret. We have this secret, and this secret that we know we can always have the opportunity to change and shift anything as long as we're willing to look within ourselves and start there.
If you do the work inside, it will literally magnify and alter everything on the outside. And so our challenge to you is to take what you've learned today, do some of the inner work, and change the outer world around you. We love you so much. Thank you for joining us on the Empowered Life podcast. If you loved this episode, we're going to ask you to do us a huge favor. Smash 5 stars, rate us, review us, leave us a comment. Tell us what you love about the show. Tell us what you want to hear on the show. But please interact with us because it helps support us in bringing better content to you, reaching more people. And if somebody that you know is going through something and they could benefit from anything that you've heard on this episode, please share it with them and help us spread this message of love and light. And don't ever forget, the power lies within. Have a great day, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Empowered Life podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And we would love your support in leaving us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to check the show notes for more information on how you can find us online and on Instagram. Now go create an amazing day for yourself, and we'll see you again soon.